who's viewing. So welcome to the Craft Podcast, where we interview experts in various fields to learn about their disciplines and how they strive towards mastery. We love talking to people who are passionate enough to master something. And Michael and I have each been asking curious questions of these craftspeople our whole lives, and we want to share those conversations with others. You'll love them all, so like and subscribe right now. And let's get right into it. Michael, who's with us today?
Today, we're joined by Jon Radoff, a game designer, author, and entrepreneur who has dedicated his career to pushing the boundaries of online communities, internet media, and computer games. With a particular focus on the metaverse, Jon's work is at the forefront of the next wave of exponential technology. He's the CEO and a co-founder of Beamable, a live game services platform that enables the creation of online games based on Unity. And Jon's passion for creative leadership and leveraging technology to move faster has fueled his drive to make it possible for creative people to make the games they envision with all the technological hurdles that normally stand in their way. And in this interview, we will dive into his journey, insights, and strategies on how he strives to world mastery and fights for the game makers of the world, and discuss his views on and prediction on some of the latest trends on technology, such as AI, web tech, and the cloud. And we're honored to have Jon on the show, and we look forward to diving into his insights and experiences. Jon, welcome to the Craft Podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So to the origin story, you've been designing games since the 80s. And you started, I guess I recently learned, even before designing video games, I guess your first interface with interactive worlds was through D&D, if I got that right. But all the way to creating early MMORPGs to today's mobile and social games. What inspired your passion to get into games, and how did you build up those, like your skills and experience over time to be a seasoned game designer?
There were two main threads in my early development, and one is Dungeons and Dragons. The other was computer programming, and they more or less happened at the same time. I was like 8 years old, and my mother got me the original Dungeons and Dragons box set, what they were calling like basic Dungeons and Dragons back at that point in time, before they eliminated some of those distinctions. And I was like eight years old, got it as a Christmas present, and really just like fell in love with the storytelling of it. So storytelling and creativity, that's always been a big part of what I've worked on in various ways. And, for me, games is like a storytelling medium, the thing that we call the metaverse. To me, it's about shared storytelling, shared imagination. To me, Dungeons and Dragons was kind of the first metaverse, even though we didn't have the word at the point in time that Dungeons and Dragons first came along. So I've always been interested in how you can spark creativity and interactivity between people. And with Dungeons and Dragons, it was everybody sitting around a table, sharing a virtual world with each other, playing roles within that world and contributing to the story and allowing that world to develop. So I had been dreaming about ways you could use technology to add more and more to that, allow more participants, break through the barriers of time and space to allow people to participate in these virtual worlds. So, when I went from, just early kid learning about programming, I was a somewhat older kid and was doing what were called BBS door games. So there were, it was at the same time as the internet, but we didn't think of it as the internet. There were bulletin board systems where you could connect with your modem, and it was all text, and people would just run these things. It was almost like the prototype for having your own website, but then it was like call a phone number and connect in text mode to these various services that people were running. And it was mostly used for like messaging and downloading files and things like that. But you could also add to them with games. So I was creating some early games. One was called Space Empire, another was called Final Frontier, and built those, then built a bulletin board system. So I kind of have jumped back and forth between making games and just the creative experience of telling the story and having this interactive space for people to share their imaginations with. And then I've also been involved in the technology. So built a bulletin board system for the Amiga computer called Paragon, did that. And since then, I've continued to jump back and forth. I built one of the first online games on the internet called Legends of Future Past, commercial online games, I should say. There were lots and lots of muds before I came along, but we were trying to figure out how to turn it into a business. Then created a creator platform for the World Wide Web when that was new. Came back, worked on big data analytics for games with a company called Gamer DNA, then made games again at Disruptor Beam, where we worked with Star Trek and Game of Thrones to make games that reached many millions of people. And then just saw so many problems in the process of creating games where you couldn't get at the creativity fast enough. There were so many technological barriers that we chose to focus on that with Beamable. And me and my co-founders have been just now helping thousands of game developers bring their ideas to life. So that's kind of the short history of things that I've worked on. But it all started with Dungeons and Dragons and hacking around with bulletin board systems and mainframes.
Right. Yeah. But I think, like, at least from my sense, in that jumping around, in each of these different arenas, you've developed like quite a bit of depth. I know a lot of people in the games industry that they just, pick one kind of function, they go really, really deep into that, and then they make a career out of that. So I'm curious, because it's also really hard to get depth in a lot of different fields and to, kind of jump into something totally new. Is there something about, I don't know, the way you process information or the way that you work that allows you to kind of get that depth in a bunch of different areas over time?
In game development, I think it's very important to have a holistic understanding of what you're trying to accomplish. It's difficult to be deep in everything,
Right.
but I think you do need to understand at least a little bit about a lot of things. And that's at the heart of game development. I think the people who I call game developers, they're not necessarily a programmer or an artist or a systems designer. People who I've gotten to know who think of themselves as game developers first and foremost usually have a lot of those aspects. Now, they might be an incredible computer programmer, like you'll get someone like John Carmack, for example, who, by the way, is good at all of these things that I just described. But he's, unusually great at computer programming and hacking through problems and on optimizing things. But he also isn't only a computer programmer. He's good at a lot of these things. I've been really lucky in the aspects of my career where I've gotten to work with game developers, where I've met a lot of people like that as well. So, and some of the people come from very unusual backgrounds. Some of the best people I've worked with who became game developers didn't start as computer programmers. In one case, one of the most talented people I've worked with, Jason Booth, was he started as an artist. As a musician, and then he started incorporating artistic aspects like shader graphs and stuff into it. Paul Siegel, another really talented computer programmer, developer that I worked with, he didn't start as a computer programmer. He was like an English major in college. So I think that really talented game developers, they are inherently curious, want to understand a lot of things. And then they're connecting the pieces together. They're connecting the technical aspects to the artistic aspects. And to me, games in some ways is like that Renaissance workshop, right? Where we're returned to this state from hundreds of years ago, where Leonardo da Vinci clearly had amazing insights into engineering and science and physics, also a phenomenal artist. And it was the fact that he synthesized those things together. That's really what game development is, because games are this media which are highly technological and highly artistic at the same time. So it's kind of pushing the two together and understanding those worlds. So, and I think it's great to go deep on whatever you're curious about. Like, in fact, I think that's really critical, particularly in an age where artificial intelligence is going to be doing more and more of like the center of your project. I think you've got to, in a recent article, I referred to this as like speed run to the edge of knowledge. You have to be pushing the boundaries of the field rather than occupying the center, because the center really is where a lot of automation is just going to increasingly happen. So I would challenge people to gain a holistic understanding of the field of game development, if that's their field, and also identify areas where you can be deep and right at that edge, at the forefront of innovation. And I suspect that this applies not only in game development, but in lots of fields, right? So I've done things outside of game development and pushing technology boundaries forward at the forefront of, new types of media, like when the web was new, and now artificial intelligence is kind of a new form of media in addition to the clear technological aspect of it. I think that's a good place to live, and it's risky, and sometimes you chase the wrong things once in a while, but that's where humanity is going to push forward, is understanding what's new and then figuring out how you can be part of what's new and innovate within it.
Yeah, that's great. And that was a very beautiful description of game development as the modern day Renaissance workshop. It also gives me hope, not having started out as one of those three functions of building games, that there could be a place for other people in the games industry too. I want to dig a little deeper into some, I don't know, maybe practices or specific anecdotes of that, the cross-discipline pollination that you mentioned, because I sense that a lot of people broadly would agree with what a lot of what you described, but when I think of the number of people that I see on Twitter who know about games, generative AI, and blockchain, and can speak fairly lucidly about what's going on in all three arenas and how it relates to the future of digital social interaction. That's not a lot of people. Most people are still kind of in among those three arenas, like they're really just kind of anchored in one. I rarely see people, except for all the crypto folks who got demotivated and then switched to the new hype train of AI. Most people are just kind of focus on one area. So do you have specific practices that you use to kind of keep yourself at speed running toward the edge of things and finding ways into new areas?
Well, I'll use a gaming analogy. It's actually a war analogy, the fog of war, but we now use this feature in games. So if you play an RTS game, for example, you can't see the whole map when you're first looking out. So there's like the undiscovered area, and it's very foggy, and you don't know until you get to it. And I think in real life, people are very intimidated by the fog of war. And anytime you talk about a new technological domain, there's a lot of fog there for a lot of reasons. Part of it is a lot of people haven't even discovered what that territory looks like at all. But you in particular are having to plow through probably a lot of technical nomenclature and things that you've never heard before. And that can just be intimidating. You just have to go into it, so like in crypto, when people first started looking at it, you're probably running into things like proof of stake, proof of work. What the heck does all this stuff mean? Like, and people who've looked at blockchain technologies for a while, like it becomes second nature to think about those words. But I think it's also instructive to look at like people who are trying to figure all this stuff out, and people literally can't even tell the difference between these things. That's how it is when you start learning something. So I try to remind myself, first of all, that people don't always understand the whole lexicon of a field. And I try to bring it back to my own experiences in storytelling and storytelling within games, and how you convey meaning to people. A big part of games is really just conveying meaning. If the game doesn't have meaning for you, then you're going to give up on the game pretty quickly because you don't care about it. In a game, you have to convey meaning through narrative, through visual storytelling, through game systems themselves that instruct you as to how you're going to go about accomplishing things within that world, and forming an aspiration for where you're going. So I may just kind of be applying that to the way I describe certain kind of problems. In artificial intelligence, again, it's the same thing all over. For people who have been looking at this for a little bit, they know that an LLM is a large language model, and that has a particular meaning to them. But you say LLM or large language model to, anyone who's just trying to make sense of what the heck Chat GPT even is, people don't really understand these things. So you got to bring it back to what people can make sense of. But when you're brand new and there haven't emerged many people who can connect the dots between highly technical understanding and, an explanation of the domain, I think you just have to force yourself to go and explore that fog of war, and just kind of, just put up with it. Like, it is going to be confusing, accept the fact that it is going to be confusing, that there's a lot of ambiguity, that people are probably not going to agree even on the meaning of words. Like you can wade into artificial intelligence discussions right now where people will want to argue about like word understand or reason. Like they want to have a philosophical, conversation over whether AI actually understands things. And actually, that would be a whole discussion of its own. But I'm more of like an engineering / pragmatist in that regard. Like I care more about like what it does, what problems it solves, than I care about like what understanding means from a philosophical standpoint.
Right.
I'll give you one more analogy though, which is just maybe some people can relate to this. But one of the best ways that I learned to navigate the fog of war was I actually had a Shakespeare professor at one point, and I love the storytelling in Shakespeare stories, but geez, if you're not used to reading Elizabethan English all the time, it can seem awfully opaque when you first sit down in it. And she didn't call it fog of war, but she just basically said, look, read through it the first time and don't worry about understanding it so much. Just get through it. And then what you have to do is read it a second time. And when you read it the second time, a lot more is going to make sense to you. So I think it's about returning to material, just thrusting yourself into the fog of war, experiencing it. You start to encounter the words, some structures come to you, and it doesn't make all that sense to you the first time through. But as you start to return, you'll connect the dots between concepts.
Yeah. Well, those are some great analogies. And that really resonates with me because in college, I learned Mandarin. That's why I ended up coming to work in China. And, people who learn languages, we know that it's, you have to come back to the same things over and over and over again. And it goes beyond just memorizing them. It's just, you have to get through experiencing stuff in context And then through having that washed over you a bunch of times, that's when you start to get a feel for what's actually going on. It's not going to happen by, some perfect detailed reading at once. And it's not going to happen from, isolating a bunch of vocab words and just memorizing them independently. So like the Shakespeare thing, it's like reading the whole thing. It's not just, memorizing the cliff notes. Yeah, and it's not just reading through it once slowly. It's going over and over again. So I really like that anecdote and that analogy. Kind of a last thing on the process of learning and understanding game development and related fields. If you were talking to like somebody who's starting to go to college right now, they want to study game design, but the world we're in is one where now there's GPT-4 that you can, anybody can go and access. And there's, all and so that's multimodal. Then there's all the art creation software. And, the pace of development of this stuff is incredible. And, the landscape is probably going to look very different in 6 months than it does today. So what would be the learning plan you would prescribe to somebody like that?
It's a great time to be a creator because people are going to be able to multiply their efforts many times over. So I see us going back to the way games were built at an earlier stage of the industry. So when I was growing up, a great computer game would be made by one person, two people, three people. Now the skills you had to apply were very different. You were doing pixel graphics, you were doing assembly language programming, like you were doing all these other things. So, over time, we've had more and more capabilities for automating parts of the creative process. So, the first was really just having compiled languages fast enough to get you out of the world of assembly language. And then we had things like 3D engines like Unity and Unreal, which made it so you didn't have to program the whole 3D infrastructure of your game anymore. So it's been a trend all along that technology has supported bigger and bigger game ideas. Along the way, there's been more and more content that has been absorbed into games because a lot of the really big games today, in some cases, have hundreds, if not like 1,000 plus content contributors to the process. So content has just sort of swelled over time. We might continue to see some examples of that. Like I can't even imagine what 1,000-person AAA game development team looks like in the future with AI able to do so many pieces of that. They'll build stuff we can't even imagine right now. So that's exciting. But even more exciting to me is the 3-person team where there's an artist who's great at envisioning the look of a world, setting the artistic direction, and then they train a fleet of AIs that are able to take their art and turn that into a lot of the content of a world, coupled with a systems designer who really understands what the compelling engagement loops and features of the game is going to be, and the hacker who knows how to put all these things together. Like I don't think we're super close to just what I've called the direct from imagination era, where you just speak into existence something holodeck like, and then suddenly it's all there. Yeah. I think we're still going to have to sculpt things into existence, try plugging things together, and bring these pieces together into some cohesive experience that people really want to engage with. But it could be that 1, 2, 3-person team where you're able to create what would currently be considered a AAA game with a very small team. And I think that's an exciting place to be. What that means in terms of learning is, again, I think it's helpful to go deep on one or more subjects that you're really curious about. And I would always tell someone, if you're super curious about something, don't get obsessed with the idea that AI might replace part of that because, for example, if you're an artist, like my daughter wants to be an artist, she's really interested in fine arts. I think Richard Feynman became an artist in the middle of his career as a physicist. Um, like if you want to learn art, then that's awesome. You should just learn what you're interested in. Maybe we'll be in some future period of abundance where actually everybody does just goes and often works on the things that they actually are most passionate about. But, you know, even in a world of automation where we have to compete economically with each other, having great taste, understanding what goes into great art, and being able to figure out how to shape that into something that'll be a valuable experience for people, that comes from training as an artist. And I think that internalizing those skills will continue to be very important, even if you can go to Midjourney and, you know, pump out endless concept art, for example. Even if we start automating big parts of the 3D graphics pipeline, all that skill set you gain in the training in building a portfolio as an artist is going to be extremely valuable. So I would encourage people to go deep on the subjects that they're most passionate about, but at the same time, zoom back the camera lens and understand how it all fits together. Like, understand, if you were talking about games, like what are all the pieces that go into a game? How do they actually relate to each other? How is art not only a way to interact with how a game looks, for example, but how does art provide visual storytelling within a game? Like, you should, like in some of the best games out there, when you look at a scene, you're not just seeing something that's pretty, you are seeing something that tells a story, that you're able to understand something about the other characters, the world that you're in, the context, even the goals from a game system standpoint by looking at things. When you design a game system for a game, game systems are not just mechanics that you interact with that, you know, give you the, you know, the dopamine rush every time you succeed at something in the short term. They're fitting together and supporting a narrative. They're giving you progress towards a greater aspiration that goes beyond the dopamine, right? So you have to understand how all these pieces fit together to create something truly inspiring for your players. And I think it's a great time to be alive and be one of the people that can encounter games with that kind of holistic understanding, because very small teams are going to be able to accomplish incredible feats of creativity here, because you're going to actually focus on the things that are important to you, that are differentiating factors that allow you to attack artistic visions that might have been out of reach just even a few months ago. So really exciting. And I would say, don't be intimidated by all this stuff and the rapid rate of change. Look at how that's going to help you achieve your objectives.
Right. So in some sense, it sounds like it's still important to go deep in some area, because that'll help you really excel. Like the tools will be rocket fuel for you to do your work even better. But it's also more important than ever to have a holistic view of how all these games or whatever product you're working in come together, because a lot of the nitty gritty details that previously people would have had to memorize a lot of stuff about are going to be kind of handled.
Right.
I think so. Valve has this famous employee handbook that they published years ago, and they talked about this concept of the T-shaped employee. So they've always looked for people that can go really deep on a particular subject, but also have a lot of general knowledge, not just across game development, but I think life in general. Like, how do you bring the humanities and experience and life experience generally into game development? And I think that's got to apply to a lot of things. You know, the reality of it is, some stuff that you could go deep on probably isn't going to be as valuable in the future. So I can't claim that 100% of the time that will be true. Like, it's like, somewhere out there are people that still, make clothing entirely by hand, for example, but most people don't buy that kind of clothing, for example. So that would be an example of like stuff will get niche over time, and some stuff isn't going to be as pervasively economically valuable as it might be today. So for example, right now in game development, like there's a huge amount of work that goes into taking the piece of concept art for something that's going to go into a game and then turning that into 3D models that then appear in the game. So you have to go through this quite a few set of steps to go from what something looks like to turning it into a model, to adding textures, to doing a UV unwrap, to making it actually game ready, having it optimized enough, putting it into scenes, lighting it, and then actually even seeing how it interacts along with a lot of other objects. So very, very, very labor intensive. And there's a lot of craft that goes into each of those individual steps. I suspect that the individual steps, many of those are going to be automated in the future. In some cases with AI, in some cases not even with AI, just like getting better and better at like the procedural logic, the algorithms that go into it. We may even use artificial intelligence to discover procedural systems that are much more efficient than AI in itself. So a lot of those little pieces are going to get automated, just like when you sit down in front of Photoshop today and you apply certain brushes that are algorithmic. Like that used to be something people did by hand before all those tools came along in the first place. People used to paste up, pieces of paper onto boards and send it off to be photographed and then to the print shop. Like, so, is, traditional print shop stuff as valuable today? There's a niche industry of people that do things using older methods, more traditional methods, but that's niche. So listen, things are going to disappear, but where it's going to be important is to understand holistically how the things fit together, what kind of problems you're solving, and how you can, in game development, deliver an experience to people and focus on the experience for that player so that you can give them the story, the features, the overall immersion that they're looking for. But I do think, you're going to have to go deep on some aspects of it. And when I say go deep on graphics, for example, it's understanding art at a fundamental level, not art as sitting in front of a 3D model system and generating a texture map, right? That's the piece that may be replicated, but understanding color theory and art history and how to sit in front of a canvas and even use real media, that stuff is what trains the eye and the mind to be an artist. And I think that is what I'm talking about. And if you're a programmer, really understanding how systems work and how the hardware works and what the bottlenecks are as you deliver a software system from top to bottom, the proverbial full stack engineer, but full stack, not just understanding client software and server software, but actually understanding even how the hardware enables things and how the hardware will continue to evolve in the future, and being a technologist who can cover a lot of area. Like, so I think that's what I'm talking about when I say go deep. Like, really push yourself to the edge of your field and understand those fundamentals of the field, not only like the craft of specific blocks within it.
That is some great insights. Yeah, and also I find it that I resonate with a lot of what you're saying. Um, and also like maybe I'm gonna be shifting the topic a little bit, and uh, it's a relative broad question, but it's about a Web3 and AI. So uh, I have been like juggling between those places and trying to learn everything. And I remember like Peter Thiel in the book Solving Individual. So he in the preface he mentioned about like the AI and also crypto is on two poles, basically decentralization and also centralization. So and I can definitely envision them to have like great chemistries to work together and empower a really new generation of our technology and also the internet. But at the current stage, so blockchain and Web3 applications are still, really less efficient compared to what we had with the centralized servers and also Web2 world. Um, so like maybe on the technical level, so what do you think Web3 and AI could be headed, and how they uh, will be working together to create something amazing, especially for maybe games. So we can see both of them being applied into game development and how that's going to be.
So I guess we can zoom back the camera lens a little bit and talk about what are some of the things that blockchain is good at, what are some things that it's either not good at or just not efficient for, what are some of the ways it might be similar to AI. So blockchain is, number one, good at just having programmatic value exchange, whether it's through smart contracts or otherwise. And what that means is pieces of software can exchange value, meaning money, assets with each other without brokers and intermediaries who govern that process. So it frees software developers to establish programmatic value exchange with each other. So that in itself is fairly transformative because it gives rise to things like marketplaces for assets that don't need to be controlled by any one party. But I think more importantly, for people that are building software today, the ability to tap into something like a marketplace, like an auction system, for example, is powerful because it's one less thing that you either have to build yourself or go to some other authority and ask them for permission to participate in their version of it. So in this little creature collection demo that we put out only a few days ago. So we did a creature collection. It's not a serious game, but it's a super cool source code project that anybody's welcome to use if they're inspired by these things. But it uses generative AI and it also uses blockchain. It mints the creatures that you're collecting that are generated through combination ChatGPT and then scenarios image generator. You collect these creatures and then we mint them out to the Polygon blockchain. So what is the advantage of blockchain in this scenario? It's exactly what I was just referring to before, which is, okay, now you've created a game that taps into marketplaces and players can trade things with each other. So you essentially have a completely open economy game with the ability to establish pricing and trade content, just like we would in the real world. Like if you play Pokemon in the real world or Magic the Gathering, people can trade with each other. You don't have to go through the one central sales site. You and your friend are playing, and if you want to buy a card from them or trade a card, you just do it. Like, so, dollar bills in your pocket are basically, decentralized money for the most part. We could argue about all the aspects of it, but at least while it's sitting in your wallet, you can just trade it with other people. You didn't have to ask for permission to do that. Magic the Gathering cards are the same thing. If you want to trade the card, you just do it. You don't ask. So the ability to trade assets around a game, I think, is an example of where blockchain allows these smaller teams to tap into a whole ecosystem of capabilities that they wouldn't have access to otherwise. And at the highest level, that's part of what artificial intelligence is doing, it's allowing you to tap into an ecosystem of capabilities or generating code or generating content so that you can realize the vision for the game or whatever application, whatever software you're developing. There's a lot more things that you can tap into that get you there much, much faster. So I think that's kind of where it's similar. Now, is blockchain a good way to, like, quote unquote, do AI? That seems, I know it's almost like a meme talking about like AI on the blockchain is sort of like one of those things where it's like, okay, let's throw everything hot together and then try to impress people that don't really, know about this stuff. Like, blockchain's probably not a very efficient way to do it. Maybe blockchain could be used as a way to allocate computational resources, which is not specifically an artificial intelligence problem. There's a lot of companies working towards how do you use blockchain as a way to take compute that's available on people's computers, whether that's dedicated server farms running in like AWS like environments, or even just like the GPU or the CPU sitting on your laptop or your phone while you're not using it. Could you sell that compute back? And blockchain is pretty well suited to that because it does away with a lot of the problems with all kinds of currencies that people all around the world would have, because you'd end up having to do like currency exchanges for all the compute that's available worldwide. It deals a little bit better with things like the microtransaction aspect of it, like when you buy some GPU cycles off of someone's phone, for example. Well, a lot of the time on an individual, inference that you're going to run, for example, or even whatever you're doing with AI, it might be fractions of a penny, right? So traditional financial systems are not really good at dealing with money in those increments, and we could get into others, but there are these people who are trying to use blockchain as a way to allocate compute resources to run a variety of different jobs and workloads. Where those workloads tend to be good is when they're not exactly real time and responsiveness. They're pretty good. That this can actually be pretty good for cases where you've got a little bit of time where the latency doesn't bother you, so that you can actually find the compute resources that can deal with that workload, and then turn it around when you need it. So it can be good for that. There's other issues with blockchain that sometimes are an advantage, sometimes are a disadvantage. When you want transparency and provenance and things like that on blockchain, it can be good. When you're shipping off a workload to execute on someone's local device, then it sort of suggests that you're not too concerned about privacy of the data that you're shipping off, because if you are, then you have to get into a whole other cryptographic level of performing the workload, but cryptographically, and then somehow figuring out how to make sure that the compute environment doesn't leak the data while it's working with it, which is a super hard problem to solve. So I don't think that like we're going to see blockchain solve all these problems, but maybe for allocating compute resources. But AI and the blockchain, it's not immediately obvious to me that it's that it solve that AI, that it will merge and AI will just be there automatically. Although there are some interesting use cases that, like we just discussed, but they are at the highest level solving some of the same problems, which is how do you give people access to resources, application components, software that otherwise they would have to invest in a huge amount of R&D on their own, or essentially pay the tax of being in someone else's permissioned environment.
Right. So, and thanks for analyze that for us. And also, like, I want to hear some of your thoughts artificial general intelligence, maybe AGI. So I mean, we don't need to go too deep on it, or it's just basically because the AI model is definitely multimodal is a future, and when they take AI can understand the multimodal inputs like a human do, like from our vision, uh, sounds, and also our taste, or even maybe smell. So that's kind of gonna be like humanoid intelligence. So do you have like any thought on that? Or, and also, if you believe AGI is coming, and also uh is gonna have a huge impact on our society. Um so like how should we position ourselves? And also, from your past experience, that you might have already experienced a lot of the technological shifts from your past experience, and what do you think about that from that perspective?
Okay, so there's a lot to unpack there. So first of all, I think AGI is a little bit of a confused term, because even people who say that they're working on AGI, not all of them even agree on what that term means. You know, I the philosophical aspect of like trying to define terms and then arguing for your term and why it's the right term doesn't, you know, I feel like that's more a job for linguists than it is for engineers, and I'm more of an engineer. So,
Mm-hmm.
I guess just at the highest level, people think of AGI as the point at which some kind of computer program is capable of doing most of the things that a human does. And then even within that, you'll get into these philosophical questions like, is it really doing what a human does? Is it really understanding the world like we do? I don't know that matters, right? Yeah. Like it matters to some people who are really interested in the philosophical aspects of it, but I think most people are actually only going to care what the outputs of the process is. We already have superhuman performance for a huge number of things that humans were once best at. So at one point in time, humans were the best at doing arithmetic. And since, roughly the beginning of the 20th century, we had computing machines, starting with mechanical computing machines who were just better at that than humans. For a long time, people were saying, okay, well, you can train computers to play chess, but they won't ever really be like a chess grandmaster. Well, now chess programs can beat pretty much any chess grandmaster. Then they said the same thing about Go, because there are so many exponentially more moves that can be made in Go because of the complexity of the playfield that you're in. And then we got AlphaGo, and we were able to beat the best human players in the world. So we have superhuman performance on these things. I know Stephen Wolfram's post recently about how ChatGPT works had an interesting observation, which is, well, for years we've been assuming that language was the thing that was really special about humans. In fact, that's what Turing thought when he proposed the Turing test. The base assumption of the Turing test is that once you can trick humans into thinking that a computer is another human, then he didn't use the term AGI, but he basically said that would be like an advanced form of artificial intelligence. Now that's being questioned. Maybe language isn't all that, right? So maybe language is really awesome, but it's kind of like Go. Like it's this complex system of understanding and established meaning, but it isn't as special as we once thought it was. And computers will actually just be I mean, I think it's obvious.
Are they
Chat
are.
GPT, they're getting better at that. Yeah, well, they make a lot of interesting mistakes still, which shows that there's a lot more R&D that has to go into these things. They don't cross over kind of domains of computational expertise very well, like plugging in just like basic math skills into Chat GPT actually has improved a lot, but isn't super strong yet. But now with the plugin architectures, that's all going to change. They're just going to tap into tools that do that very, very well within the context of language. So we've just been always on this trajectory where we raise the bar again and again and again to say, well, here's what real artificial intelligence would mean, and I guess that's really what people mean when they say AGI. When they say AGI, what they're saying is AGI will be quote unquote real artificial intelligence, and people used to kind of talk in those terms, like we would talk about real artificial intelligence, like that would be like if anyone remembers Data from Star Trek, like Data from Star Trek would be like real artificial intelligence, and someday we'll get there. And AGI is kind of like moving towards that kind of intelligence system. But of course, all along the way, computers have been outperforming humans. And, so I guess the more important question is like, well, why are people really anxious about this? And for a long time, our economies have just programmed humans. Humans are just as programmable as anything else, by the way. Like from a very young age, humans are indoctrinated into and programmed into the idea that a big part of their dignity, the value they bring to the universe, is equivalent or at least largely biased by their value as economic actors, meaning the skill I can perform that I get paid for, that I like to do, is my value as a human. I don't know that that's actually what's important for us as humans. So maybe we can move, in the best case scenario, we'll move past that and we'll enter into an economy of abundance where we pursue the things we like, and it'll be more like the Ian Banks culture where everybody kind of gets to do what they want. And if you love art, you just do art because you love it, not because you're going to get paid for it. I actually hope that's where we get to. I don't know what that economy looks like. And I definitely think that the transition to something like that could be really hard and really painful for a lot of people. So I don't know how we get to it either, but hopefully we get past this point where our value as humans is associated with our value as economic actors. That's the good case scenario. Obviously, people who want to think about more of the doom and gloom aspect worry about like the dystopian version of that. I'm an optimist. I think we've faced many huge changes in human development, whether it was the industrial age or go back 10,000 years, the shift from hunter-gatherers to building cities and in agrarian society. So we've been through a lot of these changes. AI is, maybe it is the most important one so far. Maybe it's so big, it's like when the single eukaryotic cells started forming multicellular organisms, and we're moving on to a whole new stage of even what it means to have life. It might be that, but I'm an optimist that we'll figure out, and we're going to have an opportunity here to explore what it means to be alive, to be the universe experiencing itself, both as humans and with the assistance of AI, and even fusing it all together. So it's going to work out, but there's going to be clearly anxiety and worry and bad actors and all kinds of things that are going to be along the way.
Yeah. This is like kind of bring back what you said at the beginning about the fog of war, war. So we're like, always trying to find out what's going on, and then we learn from it, and we go probably like the cycle is like we are going over similar stuff over and over again, and bring us to the stage to where we are now.
The thing to keep in mind with AI, though, is everything is ultimately energy limited as well. Like AI doesn't just magically start doing the proverbial foom where like, okay, suddenly AI's everywhere and there's a trillion AIs approaching the singularity with superhuman. Like it all takes energy.
Yeah.
I hate to break it to you, like energy has to come from somewhere to power GPUs to enable all this stuff to happen. Humans actually happen to be super energy efficient. Our brain operates at 12 watts, and we may actually end up being optimal for a lot of reasons grounded in physics for a whole range of activities. So we'll see. Like I don't think foom is a thing. I don't think you'll suddenly have thousands of semiconductor fabs just churning out GPUs to serve the robot overlords anytime soon. So energy-based decisions will have to be made. And when AI is more energy efficient for doing things, we'll use AI for energy efficient operations. Now, maybe down the road, the actual thing that we'll find is when nuclear fusion is a thing and everyone's got solar panels, maybe energy will eventually be close to free. Like energy still costs a lot. Energy is hard to produce. And maybe that's the thing that AI will lead us to, is like the need for nuclear fusion on every street corner to produce unlimited free energy will be the thing that actually enables this. And of course, just in the last year, there's been some progress on nuclear fusion, but it's also not super close. Like we're not about to commercialize free energy for everybody. But there is this underlying problem that to really make AI, completely pervasive, use it for absolutely everything, you've got to solve an energy problem, which is at the root of a lot of applications that you might otherwise not use it for.
Right. That's a great point. Yeah.
So we're coming up on the end of the hour. But we also wanted to ask a little bit about your writing and media career, because it's quite prolific as you've been exploring all these arenas and founding and successfully exiting companies. So, beyond that work, how did you first get started with writing and media, and how did you make time for those pursuits while you were building companies?
So a couple of things that I've just found really valuable for myself is that the act of writing allows me to gain a more holistic understanding of a field, because it forces me to structure my understanding. So just that act of writing is an incredible tool for understanding a subject. Second, I open source that by putting it out there. And I've learned that it's better to put out even partially formed ideas and get people's reaction to them, because I learn a lot from what people have to say about things. I think I get things right a lot of the time, but I don't always get things right. And that's sort of the spirit of open source and software, open sourcing things. The best software in the world is open sourced because it is exposed to a lot of observers who can figure out, security flaws, operational flaws, add to it. And I think that you could extend that to all forms of thinking. So I like to just put my thinking out there, structuring it, putting it forth into the marketplace of ideas so I can get reactions to it and improve my own thinking over time. So that's where I benefit from it. And there's also just an aspect of like, when I get up in the morning, I'm usually thinking about something, and unless I write it, I can get stuck and I won't move on to other things that I actually need to get done that day. So I find it just super valuable. Like I wake up early, often, 5, 6 a.m. is when I'm getting up. I wake up, I have an idea. I'll spend the first 2 or 3 hours of every day just working on ideas or learning something new. That's when I'll tend to write some of this stuff and get it out. Because again, crystallizes thoughts for me and also allows me to kind of get it out of the brain into silicon online on the internet where people can react to it, and also form incredible relationships with people through that, even with and especially with people who thought I got something wrong. Like some of those are the best relationships I've got, because then I've gotten to really know people who I respect intellectually and have creative ideas. And I love to be persuaded to the other side of something. It's not easy, not always easy to persuade me, but I love it when people do.
Nice.
That's great. Yeah, thank you for giving us a glimpse into that process. And yeah, I can see how it forms kind of a flywheel, I imagine, that also helps your work after that morning writing session, because I imagine, or it seems like a lot of the things you're writing about are maybe it's not related to a lot of like the core business of Beamable, for instance, but it can help keep you at that speed run to the edge of what's going on in the field.
Yeah, it always actually is related to Beamable, even if it isn't completely obvious all the time, because what we're trying to do at Beamable is enable creativity through game making. And this whole thing that people call the metaverse, people want to kind of have their own technical definition. For some people, it's blockchain. For some people, it's AR, VR. For some people, it's Roblox, like virtual worlds.
Right.
To me, it's actually about your digital identity online and the growing importance of how much we invest in our digital identities online, and the extension of your identity is your creativity. It's the actual expression that you have online. So the place that we've chosen to fight our first battles is game development. In the future, it'll mean all things in immersive media online, the metaverse, as people talk about it. And when you look at what we have to do to enable this next generation of game making, metaverse experience building, you have to be able to bring these pieces together, whether it's blockchain elements for people that want to incorporate open economies and marketplaces, whether it's artificial intelligence and incorporating generative elements either into the production process or the actual gameplay, whether it's cloud native technologies so you can scale up. It's all there. Like where we've tried to focus Beamable is at the center of all these things so that we can be that compositional framework that enables people to drag and drop capabilities in and ultimately speak whole worlds into existence. So that's why I talk about all of these things.
Yeah. Yeah. So it all does kind of fit in together.
I think so. Yeah. Maybe not always, or maybe I fit. Maybe it's an area where I'm initially curious and then I learn how it fits in and I spend a lot more time with it. Generative AI would be part of that. I started talking about it, roughly 3 years ago when I saw things like AI Dungeon, and I was just sort of excited about it as a new media for game making, like having virtual beings and characters and storytelling. To me, showed me a path forward for new kinds of games that didn't exist yet. Now it's that still, and it's also implementing parts of the production process of building games as well. So, it started there. And then we figured out how to really bring it into a framework so that any game developer can start making use of it at Beamable. So yes, I guess it's my long way of saying I think all this stuff fits together, but game making is where art meets the science and craft of building games through the formation of these virtual worlds that are games. Games are a kind of virtual world. In the future, the metaverse will be many other kinds of virtual worlds as well that are inherit game-like properties, but it won't always be games. And we just want to make sure that we give people the easiest path forward to do all of that creativity.
That's great.
Yeah, beautiful. I'm looking forward to a Beamable holodeck coming out 2030.
We're working on it.
All right, so we've covered like a lot in this interview, and maybe one last thing, like how should folks follow you to hear about what you're up to, and also to to check all of your podcasts and also your writings and media.
Change your mind on things.
Yeah.
You can find me on Twitter, J Radoff, Jradoff. You can find me on LinkedIn, Jon Radoff. You can go to my Substack, which is metavert.substack.com. So and I've got a bunch of others. I've got a link tree somewhere on all these places that lists the places I exist. And of course, if you're a game developer, we'd love you to come over to Beamable, and we'd love to partner with you on building your dream game.
Cool. Nice. So our guest today has been Jon Radoff. And Jon, thanks for being part of the craft. Thank you for listening to all of you. Thank you for listening to the Craft Podcast. And for more links and information about this episode, or to listen to more episodes, you can search for the Craft Podcast by Daniel Tedesco and Michael Du on YouTube and anywhere you get your podcasts. And see you next time. Until then, keep crafting.